Chapter 5:10. The middle-aged man in the camera had a long and narrow face with deep eye sockets. His expression didn't change even when Tian Bang pointed at him. The audience in the live broadcast room were guided by Tian Bang's words. Most of them looked at the man's forehead. However, this man was wearing a police cap. The hood of the cap covered his face. From the angle of the camera, they couldn't see what was underneath the cap. Zhang Ji wanted to change the angle of the camera, but judging from Tian Bang's words. No, Tian Bang didn't even need to hint. As an outstanding streamer, Zhang Ji's brain contained the video data of all registered extraordinaries and the vast majority of B-rank powerhouses in the world. Under the new stimulation, she was able to confirm the true identity of the police officer in front of her in a flash. Oh my God! Zhang Ji unconsciously let out a low cry. Perhaps her reaction was too big, but it drew the attention of the police officer. His light brown eyes revealed an ice-cold ruthlessness. It was just like the silver metal headband that was revealed after he took off his police cap. The headband covered most of this person's forehead. Strange symbols were engraved on it, unrecognizable to ordinary people. Under the illumination of the lights in the room, the symbols protruded as if they could struggle out at any time. It was extremely mysterious. When this special metal headband appeared, all uncertainties came to an end. Iron Hoop Jin Tong. Extraordinary. The leader of the 5 metal hunting group. He was without a doubt one of the most powerful hunters in the world. This was a true powerhouse at the level of the Great 100. The number of viewers in the live broadcast room exploded by 50% in an instant. It had already broken 12,000 people. Compared to the number of internet celebrities in the world, this number was certainly a tragedy. But it must be known that this was already a fifth of the entire society. Jin Tong has entered Xia City. Gang Xiong just died. A storm is coming. No, the heavens are already crying from fright. Ah, I want to go to Xia City too. Jin Tong's arrival undoubtedly proved that the rumors of 2 out of 1,000 and 16 billion were correct in a realistic sense. Even though He Yuan had just expressed the firm attitude of the Xia City branch half a minute ago, it couldn't stop the crazy growth of weeds in the hearts of certain people. Xia City has Ouyang Qin and Her Majesty Empress Wu. Jin Tong has already arrived. There may be even more powerhouses rushing there. But I can always go watch the excitement. Besides, so many powerhouses have gathered in Xia City. What if both sides are injured? What if I'm a little luckier, and the fisherman really benefits from it? At this moment, it was unknown how many people were watching the live broadcast while booking flights to Xia City. Moreover, they were piously praying, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" It would be best if they fought until the sky turned dark, until the sun and moon lost their light. Only then would they be able to give opportunists like them a chance. Perhaps due to the prayers of tens of thousands of people, the atmosphere at the scene of death was indeed cold and stiff. This was especially true for Jin Tong, a dignified extraordinary, who had been exposed with a single sentence, and in such a mocking tone. Even if Jin Tong wasn't a vain person who cared about status and style, he still had a high self-esteem. It was just like how after his whereabouts were exposed, he took the initiative to remove his disguise and come face to face with her. He looked straight at Tian Bang. Youngsters these days grow their wings early. Deep Blue is indeed a nurturing place. Tian Bang faced the transcendent Belle's cold gaze, but he could still smile. Mr. Jean is much thinner than I imagined. You can actually still wear such a big headband. Presumably, you're interested in Deep Blue because you're in the health business. It looks like the information we heard wasn't without reason. He didn't retreat as he spoke. Instead, he advanced forward. He laughed as he took 2 steps to the side, blocking Jin Tong and the metal component on the ground. I heard that Mr. Jin's cultivation hasn't been smooth in recent years, so he blazed a new path and played with some fancy tricks. He started a prosthetic game on the members of his hunting squad. He's trying to correct his path and climb to new heights. I wonder how he's progressing. Jin Tong's gaze grew even colder. He didn't respond and directly moved forward. How big was the workshop at the scene of death? The group of people were very close. In the blink of an eye, the distance between Jin Tong and Tian Bang was already only an arm's length apart. But Tian Bang's expression didn't change. Mr. Jin's extraordinary power is metallization. The matter of changing the nature of a material sounds grand and grand. I just want to know, how should the relationship between the metal used for prosthetic games and Mr. Jin be expressed? Is it the kind of mysterious illusory wind that splits the mind and splits the soul? Before he finished speaking, a long sizzling sound rang out. It was as if a piece of red-hot iron had been repeatedly thrown into ice water. It brought about a great deal of bubbles and white smoke. At this moment, at least 20 layers of format fire soared in the space of an arm's length apart. Layer upon layer, they collectively constructed the tightest format domain. But Jin Tong was even faster than Tian Bang by an instant. He raised his hand without hesitation and exerted force. His palm suffused with a metallic luster stabbed straight at Tian Bang's chest. Dignity was one thing, and actual combat was another. Jin Tong didn't have the self-awareness of a traditional senior expert. When an expert clearly expressed hostility, whether it was a mutant or a burner, raising his hand and killing them was the correct choice. What's more, Jin Tong had an idea of Tian Bang's reputation, the first person below the extraordinary, the successful combination of the burner and the blood flame system, the most successful example of Project Deep Blue. All these titles combined together was enough to prove that his strength couldn't be underestimated. And there was also He Yuan at his side. A burner could launch a combined attack at any time, anywhere. It definitely wasn't as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. Of course, it wasn't complicated. Jin Tong had never felt that there was anything in the world more difficult than one's own cultivation. He was a fleshly body strengthened. Even after becoming an extraordinary, the gap between spirit and fleshly body had rapidly shrunk. However, his fleshly body was still his most powerful weapon. The stronger one was, the better one had to be at using it. Jin Tong's body had already become semi-metallic wherever his thoughts passed. His flowing bodily fluids also changed slightly in nature. Surging power circulated and passed through the special structure of his body and soul. It stimulated the free electrons within the metal crystals and instantly formed a powerful electric current. Amidst crackling sounds, the electric arc shot out and further ionized the air. It continuously increased the strength of the electric field and formed a violent conflict with the format domain. Amidst the crackling sounds, the format fire and electric fire interweaved and then spread in all directions. Apart from He Yuan, who was already participating in the attack and defense in the form of the format domain, everyone else in the room was out of luck. Everyone's bodies were paralyzed. Some of the unlucky policemen who were in the worst position were hit head-on by the high-voltage electric current. Even though the format fire had melted some of it, it was as if they had been hit by a heavy fist. They were sent flying into the wall and then fell down. At this time, their skin was charred black and on fire. It was unknown if they could survive. The electric field of the extraordinary domain wasn't actually good at killing, but under the coverage of the domain, the powerful ionization and electrolysis could destroy the basic structure of all matter and then reassemble it into a mess at will. The format domain was also seriously affected, and its structure was basically on the border of deformation and collapse. Jin Tong still had the strength to change the direction of the electric field strength. His energy beam took form, but the twisted arcs of light were like knives and whips. There was even a terrifying heat rising. Just by streaking across the air, a tyrannical aura of death came rushing over. Jin Tong controlled all of this from the center of the electric field. Wherever his thoughts passed, the lightning whips lashed out as they pleased. Even though the two peak burners were protected by the combined formatted domains, their arms, chests, shoulders, and cheeks were all left with scorched marks. Jin Tong aimed the killing power of the electric whip at Heir. As for the other, the metal structure in the corner warped soundlessly, turning into a narrow and thin blade. It shot up soundlessly and went straight for Tianbang's lower abdomen. Everyone had to die in a specific way. Lightning flashed, and the killing intent was imminent. Heir had actually raised a metal blade with good conductivity, and Tianbang seemed to be completely unaware of the killing intent that was so close to him. Let's end this. Jin Tong felt the cold and tight headband on his head, and his thoughts focused. But in the instant that the electric light completely tore apart the format domain, a new power came crashing down from above. Suppression. That power was so terrifying that it directly pressed down from above. It was majestic and magnificent, but it also perfectly matched the format domain. Under its guidance, the format of fire that had already been destroyed and scattered actually surged in an instant, as if a roaring active volcano was being suppressed. The extraordinary electric field domain instantly warped. Under the effect of the power, the floor beneath Jin Tong's feet was like rotten soil, or maybe it was simply melted. Having lost his support, he fell rapidly. It was only then that Jin Tong had a hilariously vigilant thought, which proved that even his spiritual will had been disturbed in that short period of time just now. The moment the sense of danger arose, alarm bells rang. As one of the most outstanding hunters, Jin Tong instinctively wanted to retreat, or at least break away from this completely passive situation. But his opponent didn't give him any openings to exploit. That power was truly integrated as one, piercing straight down from the top of his head. The pressure skyrocketed until the high temperature rolled in reverse, lightning coiled around his body, and the electric field swayed chaotically. Jin Tong growled in a low voice. He had already used an explosive secret technique to resist the tremendous pressure that was pressing down. The power of pressure and recoil intersected, and the entire office building he was in seemed to be filled with gunpowder. Dozens of floors collapsed one after another, and sparks shot out in all directions, blasting hundreds of meters away. The surrounding buildings were all shaking, and large pieces of glass walls cracked at almost the same time, raining down a storm of shards. The 75th floor of the office building swayed at an angle of almost 30 degrees. Zhang Ji was hit head-on by the shock wave and fell into a corner. She was so confused that even the camera crashed into the wall. Chapter 5:11. Was the volcano about to erupt? The office building shook to such an extent that it seemed like it would snap in half at any moment. Zhang Ji was swaying left and right, her vision spinning. But half a second later, she successfully controlled the floating camera to fly out of the window. From a vertical angle, she captured part of the explosive scene from the 50th floor of the office building. This surging scene fully demonstrated Zhang Ji's ability to capture the camera after years of seeking death. Of course, at this time, no one would think that much. Most of the viewers in the live stream could only stare dumbfounded at the high-rise office building. From the base to the top, half of the building had been washed by the shock waves of flames and lightning. From this scene, it could be seen that Jin Tong had been struck from the 75th floor all the way to the surface. He was more than 300 meters high, and the floor slabs, steel bars, metal frames, and so on were destroyed. Moreover, this did not include the number of people who might have died inside the building. This was a battle between extraordinaries. For most of the viewers in the live stream who paid attention to the battle results, this was not the first time they had seen extraordinary spar, fight, or even fight to the death. But that was because they had to rely on advanced video technology to watch relevant videos, highlights, and so on. There were less than 100 extraordinaries in the world, so it was impossible for them to be their live stream guests all the time. A very small number of people would occasionally be lucky enough to see a live broadcast, which was enough for them to savor for 3 to 5 years. But now, a true extraordinary level battle was unfolding in front of their eyes. On one side was Iron Hoop Jean Tong, one of the strongest wild hunters in the world. As for the other side, the name Jean Tong shouted had already revealed who his opponent was. Her Majesty Empress Wu. Ever since her battle with the High Priestess of the Public Church 2 months ago, announcing to the world that she had become an extraordinary, Her Majesty Empress Wu had finally revealed her extraordinary power to the world once again. Compared to the unfathomable mysteries on the spiritual level, there was no doubt that the current scene of buildings collapsing and mountains shaking was more in line with the aesthetics of the general public. Under the constant shaking of the camera, the number of viewers in Zhang Ji's live stream broke through from 15,000 to 20,000 in just a few seconds. Then, it continued to skyrocket. By the time the dust at the bottom of the stairs blocked everyone's view, the number of viewers watching the dust-filled scene had already exceeded 28,000. This had already exceeded 40% of the society's membership. On one hand, one could see how attractive a battle between extraordinaries was. On the other hand, one could see that the Xia city disturbance possessed an astonishing level of popularity. This was the reason why such a large number of spectators could explode in such a short period of time. Zhang Ji had not paid attention to the situation in the live broadcast room for a long time. In a dangerous building that could collapse at any moment, she could only try her best to calm her heartbeat. At the same time, she prayed to the gods around her, hoping that the main battlefield between the two extraordinaries would appear in the area her camera could cover. Of course, this was just wishful thinking. For extraordinaries, the topography of an office building was never a reason to restrain them from using form displacement and transposition. If they wanted to, the entire Xia city would become their battlefield. How could a puny little streamer determine the direction for two extraordinaries? But just as Zhang Ji was gasping for breath and praying, someone suddenly grabbed her by the shoulder. The person's posture was very intimate, and he even blew a breath of air into her earlobe. "Oh, Zhang Ji. Don't be nervous. A beautiful and dedicated streamer like you is very rare in this world. The heavens will certainly make your wishes come true." Major General Tian. Zhang Ji didn't care that Tian Bang was taking advantage of her. She was just angry that this fellow had disturbed her work. Tian Bang chuckled as he stuck close to her. He continued to give her advice. "You must hold the camera firmly. You can't miss out on a wonderful scene." What did he mean? Zhang Ji was stunned for a moment. Then, she saw a blurry figure soar into the sky amidst the dust and smoke that filled the sky. It was Jean Tong. Given Zhang Ji's strength, it would be very difficult for her to keep up with the speed of an extraordinary if she really wanted to dash forward like a hurricane. This was the case even with the assistance of a camera worth millions. But at this moment, Zhang Ji could clearly see Jean Tong's figure soar into the sky. She also saw the figure's speed grow slower and slower. It was as if his momentum had come to an end, but it was more like he was being forcefully restrained by some invisible force. It was clearly not the gravity of Earth. It was an even more unyielding and direct force, an even more terrifying and tyrannical force. In the next second, Zhang Ji saw Jean Tong, who had reached the end of his ascending momentum, become like a deformed baseball. He was fiercely struck by an invisible club. A powerful force poured into him, sending him flying. His speed had increased explosively by more than 10 times, 100 times. In the face of such a terrifying acceleration, the originally continuous footage became disjointed. In that instant, the vast majority of people only heard the sound of an explosion. They saw the cloud of the sonic boom explode and the dust and smoke in that area disappear. Jean Tong's figure had disappeared. Zhang Ji's vision blurred. She could no longer see Jean Tong's figure. Here. At this time, Tian Bang, who was still maintaining an intimate posture, gently held the back of her neck. He exerted a little force and gestured for her to shift her line of sight. The corresponding camera also shifted accordingly. Half a second later, the tens of millions of dollars worth of camera automatically focused. It happened to capture the figure that was fiercely bounced off the glass wall of the building a block away. Bounced? That's right, bounced. This scene, the awkward scene, almost made some of the OCD viewers vomit blood. Zhangji's logical thinking was also almost messed up. Fortunately, she was definitely not a vase that only knew how to act cute. On the contrary, she was an excellent streamer with very solid professional knowledge. While most people were still doubting their own eyesight because of the absurd scene in front of them, Zhangji had already calculated the kinetic energy that Jin Tong carried at that moment based on the distance between the two buildings, the flight time of Jin Tong, and his approximate weight. Jin Tong's weight was about 80 kilograms, and his flight time was about 0.5 seconds. He was already a block away, and the straight-line distance was about 1,800 meters. Based on this calculation, the kinetic energy he carried could reach about 500 million joules. This impact exceeded the standard equivalent of 100 kilograms. It was similar to the power of a traditional battleship's main cannon from more than a century ago. Compared to the legendary humanoid nuclear bomb level extraordinaire, the absolute power of this attack was only so-so. Zhangji also couldn't calculate the specific increase in the mental interference with the material plane. But the problem was that even if she only calculated the pure kinetic energy, such a high-speed impact actually didn't break through the glass wall one block away. This was something that shouldn't happen in the normal world. Since it had already happened, it proved that the rules of the area she saw had already invisibly changed. Did the building suddenly get strengthened, or did Her Majesty Empress Wu directly change the direction of the force? She couldn't get an answer, but the direct result of this scene was, all the pressure brought about by the conversion of kinetic energy was borne by Jin Tong's body to the greatest extent. Being hit by a main cannon and having a cannonball explode in the stomach were two different things. If a standard equivalent of 10 kilograms was effectively used on a coin, without considering the wear and tear of the coin itself and its travel route, it could theoretically make this thing fly out of the Milky Way galaxy. 10 times the force was used on Jin Tong's body without holding anything back. Even an extraordinary would find it hard to endure such a tragic result. With a puff, blood splattered out of Jin Tong's eyes, ears, and nose. His eyeballs were about to pop out, and his thin and long face was contorted from the pain. His exposed skin was instantly smeared with a layer of red, and it was unknown how many of his capillaries and skin tissues had collapsed. As for the extent of the damage to his internal organs and bones, only Jin Tong himself knew. It was very difficult for outsiders to see the limits of an extraordinary. Just like at this moment, Jin Tong was suffering from all sorts of injuries. But in the blink of an eye, a hoarse and violent roar rang out. Jin Tong screamed as he curled up and shot out with all his might. Ah! The roar spread out, but what really made people's scalps go numb was another source of sound. In the void, it was as if hundreds of bowstrings had been released. Amidst this increasingly dense tremor, be it the building or the air a street away, everything produced dizzying distortions. There was another explosive rumble, and Jin Tong's body instantly turned into a tangible bubble before disappearing. Tian Bang's hand moved again, and Zhangji consciously looked up in the direction of the force. She saw that in the gray sky, a long azure scar had been torn open at some point. It extended southeast, and wherever it passed, a dark red color seeped out. Jin Tong had probably activated some kind of long-distance escape technique. In the blink of an eye, he had already traversed dozens of kilometers and was almost out at sea. He ran away just like that. The battle between transcendents had ended. Zhangji was a little dumbfounded by this anticlimactic ending, and so were the 30,000 viewers in the live stream channel. It wasn't until the long scar was about to disappear into the horizon that a large number of bullet comments appeared. What's going on? Jean Tong has typed GG. Her Majesty Empress Wu has also typed GG. Jean Tong says that Xia City is too hard. He can't break through. I must have seen a fake live stream. But that fall just now really hurts. Accelerating from 0 to 10 times the speed of sound in an instant, and then returning to 0 in an instant. Just what kind of experience is that? Teacher Jean Tong can give lessons in the future and impart his experiences, but does he really know how Her Majesty Empress Wu did it? The surging bullet comments were already mixed in with the comments of many powerhouses. There was no lack of mockery and ridicule among them. It was true that Jean Tong's performance today was worse than dog shit. From start to finish, one of the best wilderness hunters in the world had been completely controlled by Her Majesty Empress Wu. He had completely lost the rhythm he should have had. Was Jean Tong not at his best, or was Her Majesty Empress Wu's strength beyond imagination? Chapter 5:12. Don't get distracted. Tian Bang reminded her. Zhang Ji looked up in shock and saw the dark clouds above Xia City distort once more. They burst apart. Although the turbulence was great, there was no sound. It was because of this that the pencil-straight long scar that nearly sunk into the horizon suddenly twisted and fell diagonally downwards. They were still fighting. Zhang Ji looked up at the strange scene in the sky and was delighted at first. She felt that the live broadcast could continue, but then she realized that the battlefield was too far away. It was beyond her reach. The broadcast room was filled with howls of grief when they saw the transmitted image. Some people didn't give up and encouraged, brothers and sisters of Xia City, it's time for you to show your worth. There really was a response from Xia City, I'm looking at Dongshuan Beach. I'm going with you. Squeak. I'll go. They're specifically currying favor with Her Majesty Empress Wu. Please share your live broadcast room number. Please open up the donation channel. It'll be easier to handle the aftermath. No matter how noisy the broadcast room was, Zhang Ji was very anxious. She looked all around, trying to find a miraculous way to rush over. At this time, her earlobes heated up again. Tian Bang continued to tease, do you need a ride? I just happen to have a flying car. I can just go downstairs. Zhang Ji turned her head. After being taken advantage of for so long, she finally saw Tian Bang's face after the battle. Tian Bang was actually in a sorry state at the moment. His hair was a little unkempt because he was directly facing Jean Tong's extraordinary electric field, and there was even a scorch mark on his face, adding some blood and fire to his sunny, boyish smile. Of course, it also revealed part of his true nature. Zhang Ji blinked. The bit of emotion in her heart was quickly diluted. Doubt surged in her mind, and the vague thoughts that originally existed gradually became clear. You guys, sure. You can't use the word we carelessly. I'm such a clean stream. When you mention me, it sounds like I'm forming a clique and scheming. That's how it was. Zhang Ji was about to ask again when Tian Bang took the lead. He leaped out of the broken window and flew downwards. This office building had been tossed around for so long. Anyone who wanted to use the elevator would have a serious problem with their intelligence. Zhang Ji naturally followed, but when she came out of the window, she subconsciously turned her head. She saw He Yuan staying at the scene. She had no intention of following. Hey, hurry up. Tian Bang called out from below. Zhang Ji caught up. What about Vice President He? She also has to clean up the mess. Ever since she became a secretary, this skill has been maxed out. I'm training Zhu Ling so that he can learn more. Zhang Ji sighed. She felt that Tian Bang's description of Officer He's character was a little broken. It makes sense if he was the one providing support. It would be in line with his usual style. This way, we can explain things to the government and the military. With the confluence of the military and government forces, does Xia City really want to play independent? It can't compare to some headquarters. They sell their bodies to lick the boots of others while they're at it. Xia Chui is inflated. It's full of farts inside. Motherf asterisk cur. I'll give you this. Which bastard was the one who leaked the 2000s? Several floors later, the map rumbled and exploded. At this time, those who still persisted in rational discussion belonged to the outliers. Someone in the middle asked weakly, what if Her Majesty Empress Wu did all of this by herself? What does that mean? This was originally a very good question, but a certain ID cut in at the right time and analyzed the overall situation. His mouth was very big, and his tone was even louder. Xia City probably wants to establish its might. Ouyang Chen and Yu Gang are certainly involved in this plan, and they most likely didn't play a good role. Establishing its might is especially effeminate. Can it really frighten people without the deaths of millions? F***CK, the person above just opened his mouth. That's awesome. The person above is the one with commendable courage. That's right, I'm talking about you. The great blood demon is mighty. He hit the nail on the head. Purple gold authentication. It really is blood demon. I'll take a photo with Great God Blood Demon as a souvenir. Is Great God Blood Demon still accepting disciples? Can I kneel first? Because of the sudden appearance of the extraordinary Blood Demon, the RT-8313 mission thread became exceptionally noisy. After a series of tosses and turns, the thread basically reached a consensus. Indeed, under the provocation of 2016 billion resources, the eyes of the vast majority of people would turn red with greed. If Xia City was suspected to be an allied power and haggled over the lives of people at this time, it probably wouldn't serve as a deterrent. Instead, it would encourage the greed of certain people and nurture their wishful thinking. So you're saying that Jin Tong can also retreat unscathed? Most likely. How many extraordinaries are there in the society? If one were to be cut down just like that, the pressure on Xia City would be enormous. In the thread, someone had already posted a crying laughing emoji. Thanks to the great blood demon's auspicious words, I will immediately book a plane ticket to Xia City. When I return, I might even be able to get the treatment of being escorted out of the country as a gift. Shameless as the person above. Will you allow me to tour Xia City with you? Let's go together. One-way plane tickets should be enough. Dog fart. Pure trash. Zhang Yingying was still spinning around on the Huanhai Highway due to the problem of the journey. She was already very annoyed, but when she saw the message on the forum, her anger surged. She smashed her fist on the steel plate of the car. There was a loud bang, and the place where she smashed her fist made a deep dent. This is an armored car. The corner of the special police officer's eye twitched, but he didn't dare to say anything. Zhang Yingying's anger had yet to subside. She smashed the car 2 more times. Suddenly, she froze. Her gaze pierced through the front windshield and looked at the scenery of the sea and sky outside the Huanhai Highway. After going around for half a day, she had actually fought her way here. Stop the car. The armored car finally got the chance to show off its performance. It came to a screeching stop. Zhang Yingying pushed open the car door and leaped. She circled around the body of the car like a flipping petrel and plunged down the sea of the precipice. When the special police officer staggered out of the car, he saw the long-legged beauty with a strange temper running fast on the precipice, still heading for the golden beach in the distance. With a muffled bang, a column of water dozens of meters high exploded on the surface of the sea 100 meters offshore. The surging waves and the splashing water droplets almost slaughtered all the creatures in the surrounding water, including the undercurrents in the deeper water. After such a series of actions, the terrifying kinetic impact was finally reduced by more than half. Ah! Jin Tong gasped loudly. He popped his head out of the shallow water, but he spat out another mouthful of blood, which mixed with the icy rain, salt water, gray waves, and white foam. There were also the remains of several fish and jellyfish. He felt that most of his soul had been lost. But he didn't have time to think about the extent of the injury to his body and soul. Instead, he used all his strength to stimulate his yuan qi and calm his mind. He also prepared an overbearing secret technique to stimulate his potential, ready to withstand the terrifying impact from Her Majesty Empress Wu. However, after a few seconds, although the pressure from the opposite side was always there, the substantial impact did not come. I actually smashed into the sea. Good luck. The sound waves were transmitted from the golden beach that faced the sea. Under the erosion of the freezing rain, the color of the beach was somewhat dim, like an orange peel that was close to rotting. Jin Tong was even more convinced that it was the death domain of the beauty on the shore. This, Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was respectfully addressed by the world, was now like a petty bourgeois girl strolling in the morning. She wore a classic white shirt paired with black wide-legged pants, with a slightly unruly leopard belt in the middle. Her shoes and socks could not be seen clearly. She could only see that her clothes were light and thin, swaying gently in the wind. Her Majesty Empress Wu's attention was still on the book, or it could be said that she was in the most comfortable state she had created for herself. Jin Tong's clear questioning words entered her ears, but she didn't even raise her eyelids. I warned you before not to go ashore, or else I would beat you to death. Let's not talk about the process, but now you've perfectly fallen back into the sea and haven't set foot on the shoreline. For the sake of this luck, I won't see you out. Jin Tong stared fixedly at Her Majesty Empress Wu. He didn't believe that the basis of this woman's decision was some damned luck or whatever. Even saying it was mood was more reliable than that. But he didn't say anything else. In this kind of situation, he would be an idiot if he spat out another word. Jin Tong had fought with the aberrations in the wilderness all year round, and it wasn't the first time he had encountered a crisis that could kill him. This had also trained him to be soft and hard, straightforward and submissive in his style of doing things. If he couldn't beat her, then he couldn't beat her. If Her Majesty Empress Wu really wanted his life, he would fight to the death. But since she didn't care about him, what harm was there in enduring for a moment and retreating? Jin Tong slowly breathed in and out. His body cut through the icy cold water and slowly moved backwards. But at this moment, he suddenly heard a vague sound. Someone was rushing over at lightning speed, and the content of the shouts was related to him. His heart jumped slightly, and he looked at Her Majesty Empress Wu on the shore. Even though there was a third party involved, this beautiful woman still didn't have any intention of changing her decision. The book in her hands flipped over another page. The patter of freezing rain fell, drenching her clothes and long hair, but when it touched the page, it all silently melted away. He had already been completely ignored. This wasn't an act. Perhaps from the very beginning, Her Majesty Empress Wu had never cared about him. Jin Tong gave Her Majesty Empress Wu a deep look. He wanted to carve this clearly high-profile, yet mysterious woman into his heart. Soon after, his entire body sank into the surface of the sea, retreating towards the deep sea. A few seconds later, he disappeared into the misty depths of the vast ocean. Hey, 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 hey. Just half a minute after Jin Tong disappeared, Zhang Yingying rushed over from the distant Huanhai highway, panting. But in the end, she was still a step too late. She could only watch helplessly as Jin Tong disappeared into the distance. Her enthusiasm of seeing the battlefield fly over from beyond the sky and joining in on the fun was completely doused in ice. Zhang Yingying looked at her boss with a gaze of disbelief. Although she knew that no one could guess her boss's thoughts, in this dangerous time of war, to send off a great extraordinary enemy with a wave of his hand, such a strange train of thought, no, someone on the internet had clearly deduced this. Boss, you, Zhang Yingying wanted to say, "Boss, are you crazy?" but she finally knew how to swallow those words. Then she wanted to say, "Don't tell me you guys really don't dare to kill me," but she felt that it was too sudden. Following that, her quick-witted mind couldn't find a third suitable replacement word. She could only say, you, for a long time. Even though she couldn't say the words out loud, her attitude was expressed. Her Majesty Empress Wu still gave face to her subordinates. She moved her gaze away from the scroll in her hand and looked at Zhang Yingying. She nodded and said, "You've almost reached the limit of your current level. The effects of cultivating your mind and body during this period of time are not bad. Next, you need to carve out your own path in order to change your fate and become independent from the world. Defy the heavens and change my fate." "Boss, you've read too many novels." Zhang Yingying was so angry that she laughed. "Also, are you reading Buddhist scriptures?" Had he read too many Buddhist scriptures and learned the heart of a bodhisattva? That place is obviously full of bragging ****. Her Majesty Empress Wu turned her gaze back to the scroll. She said unhurriedly, "No matter how you boast, as long as you can boast to the point that many people don't doubt it, it can also be considered an extraordinary power that defies the heavens and changes fate. Of course, it would be better if there was a self-consistent logic. Considering that this is the result of an uncivilized civilization, it's not unreasonable to raise its value a bit higher." Your Majesty, I'm not discussing Buddhist scriptures with you. You said it first. Then I'll tell you now. Why did you let the enemy escape? Answer me. Indulging the enemy? I didn't. You're still saying you didn't. I saw it all. That Jin Tong escaped right under your eyes. Didn't you see the comments online? Those greedy, insatiable, and lawless troublemakers are all celebrating, okay? You let Jin Tong go. You're simply encouraging them to come to Xia City to hunt. Luo Nan's side is dead. You're talking about Jin Tong. Has he broken away from the battlefield? Her Majesty Empress Wu raised her gaze once more. She looked at the drizzling rain falling from the sky. She casually extended her hand and caught a drop of rain on her fingertip. She pinched it lightly. If everyone believes that he has broken away, then I have nothing to say. Zhang Yingying was at a loss and puzzled. When you're weak, acting cute is instinctive. When you're in danger, being low-key is smart. But when you need to be responsible, you still play old tricks. This malicious act of acting cute is just asking for a beating. Luckily, Yingying, you're still in the legal stage of acting cute. Come on, smile for us to see. Zhang Yingying wanted to kneel before her boss. She was just about to throw caution to the wind and unleash her great act of unreasonable behavior when her heart inexplicably trembled. The white rainbow circulating around her body hummed. It was as if a layer of gloomy clouds had condensed into a clear intent. But when she tried to sense it again, it was hard to grasp. She just felt that the dusky scene of the sea and sky before her eyes seemed to have become much more oppressive. It made people feel that she was not only broad-minded, but also had a mature and stable set of rules. From Jin Tong's point of view, Her Majesty Empress Wu's attack had no flaws or weaknesses. Every detail was perfect, forming a towering peak that could not be moved. This was the so-called, the more you look up to it, the more you look up to it. What was a divine weapon and what was a piece of scrap metal? It was clear as soon as one touched it. In fact, when the martial monarch released the techniques of the dripping sword and the burning heart saber on the internet, it had already given people such a feeling. It wasn't difficult to come up with an offensive technique. What was truly difficult was to be precise, concise, and high-level. The more Jin Tong experienced it, the more he felt that there was a lot of knowledge in it. Looking at it this way, even though he had lost miserably, he had gained a lot as well. It would be greatly beneficial for him to comprehend it carefully when he returned. Jean Tong sighed unconsciously. Are there really people who are born with knowledge in this world? No, that's not right. Jean Tong suddenly shook his head and subconsciously touched the metal band on his forehead. The perennial chill seeped into his skull, but it suddenly stirred up a fire in his heart. There was no such thing as someone who was born with knowledge in this world. Putting the miraculous label on an unsolved matter was just the behavior of a fool. Rather than putting someone else on a pedestal, it was better to put himself in their shoes and think. Perhaps Her Majesty Empress Wu's achievements had a more complicated origin, just like what he had experienced in the past. The fire in his heart didn't last too long, and baseless speculation couldn't solve his current injuries. Jean Tong sank that speculation to the bottom of his heart and wanted to find a relatively safe area to recuperate. He moved, gently shaking his body to rub against the vibrations of the seawater. He emitted ultrasonic waves like a dolphin, probing the surrounding terrain and the living creatures. This was a small technique that experts of the physical side used in place of spiritual senses. It was said that there were many living creatures in the natural world that could emit ultrasonic waves and infrasound waves. Dolphins, bats, tigers, and elephants before the era of distortion were all typical examples. After the change of generations, there were only more such living creatures. Jean Tong knew that there were at least 100 species of living creatures on land and in the sea that possessed similar instincts. However, to be like Luo Nan of Xia City, to be able to emit destructive high-energy infrasound waves by relying on a mutant tool that wasn't even remotely related, Jean Tong's thoughts suddenly froze. That's not right. There was no reason for him to suddenly think of Luo Nan. Jean Tong's psychic senses of an extraordinary and the reality of his heavy injuries made him exceptionally sensitive. Moreover, he really did have a feeling of discomfort. His figure suddenly came to a stop, calmly hovering in the seawater. He temporarily stopped using ultrasonic waves to probe. His figure merged with the seawater, and only his thoughts and senses spun at high speeds. He switched from active probing to passive receiving. Every movement in the surrounding sea area was transmitted to him through vibrations, temperature, and other forms. He didn't have the extensive and meticulous perception methods of psychic ability users, but his tempered psychic senses could target a vague threat point in a certain direction and obtain an instinctive response. He could at least know where the threat was coming from through this method. However, the problem was much more serious than he imagined it to be. After he truly reacted, he discovered that all around him, above and below him. Actually, he could sense the entire sea area. He had entered a subtle and ice-cold atmosphere. Perhaps there wasn't anything that could directly threaten his life right now, but it was as if there was an incorporeal specter near him. The specter wandered about, drifting up and down. A bone-chilling chill that transcended the plane of reality seeped into him, thread by thread. This chill seemed to be familiar to him. Jean Tong's figure floated up with a thought, and he broke through the surface of the sea. The gloomy colors of the sea and sky had persisted for many days. The surroundings of Xia City and the open sea were all like this. Right now, the sea was covered in powdery rain. It couldn't be considered a freezing rain, but it was still cold and dense. Jean Tong allowed the powdery rain to brush against his face as he gazed into the distance. He relied on the keen perception of an extraordinary to lock onto a blurry yet tangible dividing line from the dusky scene of the sea and sky. It was this dividing line that separated the pure power of nature and the interfering scene that was infused with the will and emotions of an individual. Commonly known as a domain. This dividing line continued to push into the distant sea area without end. It dyed the boundless sea and sky with a deep personal color, as well as a bone-chilling killing intent. So that's how it is. Jean Tong had long since seen through the strange phenomenon of the freezing rain in Xia City. It was the result of human influence. But he had always believed that the work, including the raindrop sword slaughter, should have come from Her Majesty Empress Wu. But after fighting with Her Majesty Empress Wu, he suddenly came to a realization. This was absolutely not the work of that person. The chill was exposed, and the killing intent was dense. It was far too different from Her Majesty Empress Wu's perfect harmony. Of course, it wasn't Ouyang Qin either. At worst, he could just retaliate back. But in this current situation, Jin Tong let out a breath. He was simply unable to estimate the limits of Luo Nan's soul strength. He was also unable to imagine the scale of Luo Nan's reserves. Cough, cough. His blood rushed to his throat, causing a knot to form in his heart. His irritation gradually rose. If he were at his peak, he wouldn't care. Even if Luo Nan entangled him, Luo Nan would be nothing more than a mosquito. Luo Nan would not be able to harm his foundation. But right now, he urgently needed to find a place to heal his injuries. How could he gather his strength if he was constantly being watched? Jin Tong suppressed his negative emotions with difficulty, but he knew that he had to change his plans. He hoped that Her Majesty Empress Wu was a person who kept her promise. He used his wristband to contact his subordinate who had been lingering in the open sea. He reported his current coordinates. "Come here and pick me up." It was safest for an injured beast to lick its wounds in an isolated and uninhabited place. But right now, Luo Nan was like a maggot attached to the bone. He needed to leave the sea area covered by the freezing rain domain as soon as possible. He crossed the dividing line with the fastest speed possible, suppressing the expansion speed of Luo Nan's domain. Jin Tong quickly hung up the phone, but he could still hear his subordinate trembling with excessive joy. Clearly, the news of his great defeat in Xia City had already spread. "Do they think I'm going to die?" Jin Tong snorted coldly. He recalled the rather famous female streamer from the inner world in the office building. With such a person there, the news of him being blasted out of Xia City would probably be known by the entire world. Even though he was at his level, empty fame was no longer a burden. But when he thought of Her Majesty Empress Wu's awe-inspiring divine might, he couldn't help but be in a bad mood. His thoughts reached this point, and his mind became a bit absent-minded. He unconsciously recalled the details of his experience fighting against Her Majesty Empress Wu. He pondered over how he should deal with her if they were to fight again. It was absolutely impossible for ordinary methods to match up to her perfection and profoundness. His thoughts entered the alley, and it was hard to deviate. Jin Tong stood on the surface of the sea, his mind immersed within. He was in a trance, unaware of the passage of time. Jin Tong only came to his senses when the sound of his subordinate's airship entered his ears. He wanted to move, but his chest suddenly felt stifled. He discovered that he was lacking in blood essence. I was actually exhausting my mind to make a deduction just now. How could I do something so unwise? Jin Tong's mind was agitated, and it was as if a cup of ice water had been poured over his heart. He suddenly felt that something was wrong. The airship that was approaching at high speed was already clear in silhouette. He could even see the cockpit and the figures of the people on the front deck. But why were those people staring in shock and fear? Lightning was like a blade in an instant, and the magnetic force was like a lock. He locked Mo Luan's figure in an instant and killed him with a single slash. However, the black smoke dispersed and reformed. Mo Luan's body was reborn within a few breaths, and he pounced forward once more. "So, you've also become a puppet in this chaotic world. Is this a conspiracy of the Blood Flame Order? Or is this the handiwork of that kid Luo Nan? It can't be that Luo Nan already predicted my fate, right?" Jin Tong's mind rang with alarm when this thought became clear. He was a grand and powerful extraordinary, yet he actually had such weak thoughts. His mental strength was clearly damaged. He couldn't waste any more time. It just so happened that he had roughly seen through the changes in the laws of space. If he didn't exert his strength now, when would he? This thought was born, and the metal hoop on top of Jean Tong's head became even colder. A slight pain pierced his forehead, and it changed in an instant. It was like fire and lightning striking down from his brain, binding his entire body. Jean Tong's pupils darkened as the pain assaulted him. The lightning and magnetic field ring retracted within his body, allowing Mo Luan to attack within. His gaze grew even colder as he watched the black smoke soul body transform from illusory to real, about to seep into his body to attack. Suddenly, thunder rumbled in the air, and lightning flew out before the thunder. It slashed through the black smoke in front of him. Not only did this slash kill Mo Luan once more, but its power grew even stronger. It brought with it an electric and magnetic field, using ionization and electrolysis to diffuse the void. It mixed with material properties and contained a sharp edge. It forcefully pierced through the transformation of the smoke and clouds. Another clap of thunder rang out, and light suddenly appeared. A high cliff suddenly rose from beneath Jean Tong's feet. Its power coiled and lingered, and lava flowed. There was an altar at the peak of the mountain. Rays of light coiled around it, forming over a dozen groups of runes. The mountain acted as a prison, trapping Jean Tong within. The binding and oppressive feeling behind him grew heavier, faintly resonating with the altar and the runes. Jean Tong laughed in spite of himself. He had finally revealed himself. Though this place was unfamiliar, he had Mo Luan's lead and combined it with the relevant information. He already had some ideas. The Blood Soul Temple. It really was a remnant of the Blood Flame Order. What was the relationship between Luo Nan and the Blood Flame Order? Forget it. None of this was important. It could be seen from the attack just now that Jean Tong's extraordinary strength had already exceeded the bearing range of Luo Nan's embryonic domain. Then no matter how miraculous the Blood Soul Temple was, it was nothing more than an illusion to him. Could it be that Mo Luan was no longer reborn? He had even used his own psychic perception to capture the location where Luo Nan was suspected to be. That fellow was right above his head. Did he really think he was some sort of supernatural being that overlooked the world? Die! Jean Tong didn't give Luo Nan any time to react. Lightning condensed into a flying spear, and he raised his arm, ready to throw it. His strength was about to be released, but a few ice-cold fingers pressed against his wrist at this time. Behind him, Jean Tong's hair stood on end in an instant. Lightning swam around his body. Under the catalysis of the powerful electric field, his figure seemed to have shed the boundaries of an ordinary body. He twisted into light and pounced forward. He turned back in the blink of an eye, and the thunderclap lightning blade hummed as it slashed forward. The lightning had yet to arrive, but a figure had already appeared. Jean Tong's heart thumped heavily. He felt a bit stuffy. Wu Zhao. The person behind him wore a white shirt and trousers. His black hair was like a waterfall, and he held a scroll in his hand. It was Her Majesty Empress Wu, who had just beaten him to the point where he couldn't even fight back. Jean Tong's mind nearly exploded in that instant. The only thought in his mind was to turn around and leave. But a second wave of stimulation from the metal headband poured into his mind, catalyzing his state to an unprecedented peak. His mind was even more marvelous. It was as if the heavens were helping him. His gaze swept past, and he suddenly saw a faint shadow on Empress Wu's shoulder and flank. It was like limbs were spreading out. It was like a demon had appeared in a trance. This shadow. It was an incorporeal wraith. It was in the shape of a spider. That's right, the human-faced arachnid. Jean Tong seemed to understand a lot in that instant. He could clearly feel a great loss of blood and energy in this moment. It was as if a demonic god had chopped off half of his flesh and blood. And the flow of the vital energy of the flesh and blood was the amalgamation of the martial monarch and the human-faced arachnid before his eyes. To be precise, it was the image of the martial monarch that the human-faced arachnid had stripped from the depths of his mind. Jean Tong stared fixedly at this demonic image, and a few questions that were hard to solve were connected in his mind bit by bit. Without a doubt, this human-faced arachnid was the one that had possessed his body and soul. Its attack channel was most likely the crack in his mind that had appeared when he faced the martial monarch's miserable defeat. The human-faced arachnid had taken advantage of the flaw in his mind to extract a steady stream of blood essence and vital energy. It had fed Luo Nan's embryonic domain and propelled the operation of the Blood-Soul Temple. Now this thing had done something even more inconceivable. Moreover, it spread throughout his entire body at an astonishing speed. One finger destroyed his entire body's vitality. Jean Tong's expression froze. He could only watch helplessly as his own body decayed. He no longer had the power to reverse the situation. The one who caused all of this was a thin, malnourished figure. At this moment, he was right in front of Jean Tong. He slightly leaned to the side, letting Jean Tong's stiff straight arm pass by. His eyes were tranquil and nearly empty. Jean Tong had seen this figure before. Just today, before he entered Xia City, he confirmed his most important objective once more. 16 billion in wealth, 2/1000 of the shares, and the authority that was closest to the apex of the world. Jean Tong's eyes widened. He wanted to reach out and grab it, but that figure dissolved like mist, leaving no trace behind. The Blood-Soul Temple shook. The clouds hung low in the sky, and bloody light surged. Jean Tong's mostly decayed body was on the altar. His feet had already sunk into the altar. It was not accurate to say that he had sunk. It was more appropriate to say that he had dissolved. The unrestrained imagination was even more chilling than the bones in front of him. And under the mountain of bones, there was a special component that didn't match the whole thing. It was a half-tilted dual-purpose airship. Its body was twisted and deformed, and there were traces of fire in some areas, but they were also covered by hills of white bones. It was precisely because of the existence of this ship that the dense bone mound obtained enough buoyancy to float on the sea surface. Zhang Ji shifted the camera and scanned the ship. Finally, it locked onto the ship's number and name. Gold accumulation. Zhang Ji scanned through the information in her head, and her breathing became a little stifled. This is the transport vehicle of the 5 metal hunting group. From the looks of it, they might have been completely wiped out. She didn't get a response from Tian Bang. It wasn't just because of the noise from inside and outside the helicopter. In fact, ever since they arrived in this area, Tian Bang, who had always liked to joke around and take advantage of others, was surprisingly quiet. At this time, he just knocked on the headset, signaling the pilot to come closer. When the helicopter was almost directly above the White Bone Mountain, Tian Bang, who was at the other side of the hatch, jumped down without any warning and landed on the top of the White Bone Mountain. The top was relatively flat, and the entire White Bone Mountain seemed to be pieced together casually, but it was surprisingly sturdy. The entire White Bone Mountain didn't move at all even after Tian Bang jumped down. There was such a thing. Seeing this, Zhang Ji also wanted to jump down, but just as she moved, she saw Tian Bang waving at her, stopping her. Was there any danger up there? If it was just danger, Zhang Ji wouldn't care. But on top of the White Bone Mountain, Tian Bang's expression was unprecedentedly stern and grave. It directly stopped Zhang Ji from challenging his patience. In the next moment, Zhang Ji saw the format of fire outside Tian Bang's body. He reached out with his arm, but this time, he was absorbing the seawater below the White Bone Mountain. The undulating sea surface was like a dragon sucking in water, and a whirlpool formed. A stream of water directly rose up and went straight to the top of the White Bone Mountain. Another stream of water flowed from bottom to top, submerging the bottom of the White Bone Mountain, and the foundation of the ship. The seawater rose and fell, instantly washing the white bone mountain. On the mountain, the cracks in the bones and the holes in between had water flowing up and down. What was Tian Bang doing? Zhang Ji didn't understand. There were countless ability users watching the live broadcast right now, and they had the same thoughts as Zhang Ji. However, Luo Nan didn't care about their discussions and debates in the live broadcast room, the forums, the chat group, and various other channels. Luo Nan was sitting in the waiting area of Xia City's administrative hall right now. Since it was Sunday, most departments weren't working. There weren't many people here. Qi Nikuan, who was in charge of security, was very idle. He held a flexible screen and watched the live broadcast. The display showed the white bone mountain in the open sea, as well as the trajectory of the surging water. Luo Nan only scanned it twice, closed his eyes, and pondered over his own matters. He was a participant, the leader, and the manipulator of this entire situation. He was also the true winner of today's bountiful profits. Even though it had been some time since the matter, he still needed to calm his mind and straighten out his subsequent train of thought. Yes, he had used his own various resources to successfully behead Jin Tong. This was an amazing accomplishment. And the core thing that allowed him to realize this accomplishment was the altar frame that he and the Wraith sign had constructed together. It could be called the Beast Fighting Arena. In the marvelous space constructed by the order frame of formatting theory, Luo Nan was the controller. He had always been playing a game of balance where there were gains and losses, Luo Nan had experienced something similar before. At the time, the Wraith sign and Rui Wen had exchanged pointers on the altar. They had risen in level at the same time, ultimately prompting the awakening of Rui Wen's supernatural powers. Another time, the Wraith sign had crossed space to confront the human-faced arachnid of the Order of Justice. Through these two experiences, Luo Nan had a general understanding of the operating rules of the altar. As long as one maintained self-will here, one would be able to borrow the power of the sacrificial offering to ascend and break through. One was bound to gain something here. But at the same time, those who stepped onto the altar were sacrificing themselves in order to comply with the ultimate rule. The winner takes all. The loser withered and perished. And relative to the rules, the only people who had special privileges were Luo Nan and the Wraith sign. The Wraith sign was the provider of the altar frame. It possessed the most cunning instinct to utilize the rules. Even if it failed, it could find a scapegoat. The Wraith sign was the one. Luo Nan was the controller and supporter of the altar frame. Naturally, he surpassed the Wraith sign. He was the one. But for now, Luo Nan was a person with special privileges. He was still fumbling with his own rights. He profited from this and received offerings, but he could not determine victory or defeat between the sacrificers. Right now, the only thing he could control was deciding what the sacrificers could offer and what they couldn't offer. What they could obtain and what they couldn't obtain. For example, though I know your pockets are rich, I don't want money. I only want your fingers. I also know that you are very hungry, but I won't give you food. Instead, I will gift you with beautiful clothes. And so on. Luo Nan was adjusting throughout the entire battle. He constantly increased the consumption of Jin Tong's flesh and blood according to Jin Tong's state. This allowed Jin Tong's thoughts to grow clearer and clearer, but it also consumed a great deal of mental energy. He maintained the balance of the rules of the altar, but he imposed the imbalance of demands onto Jin Tong's body. From this, he controlled the overall situation. Of course, the most fundamental rule of the altar was that the winner takes all. If Jin Tong really made it through this hurdle, Luo Nan would have no way of stopping him from soaring to the heavens. In reality, one really couldn't underestimate the wisdom and accumulation of any extraordinary. Jin Tong really was going to succeed in the end. However, Rui Wen appeared just in time. Jin Tong's spiritual awareness broke through the barrier, and his flesh and energy were completely exhausted. She dealt a fatal blow. Everything that Jean Tong had was completely obtained by the side that Luo Nan supported. Right now, the bright imprint that came from Jean Tong's body was climbing up the mountain of the Blood Soul Temple. It passed through the stone forest and the lava lake. Even though the strange energy was melted away, it was unharmed. It passed through the courtyard and the garden. Though the shepherd's imprint was left behind, it did not stop this object. Then there was the third level of the cave. The stone statues of the mush-mouth ape and Mo Luan were already placed here. This was also the place where Luo Nan could most easily mobilize his combat strength. However, the bright imprint didn't stop at all. It clearly didn't match this cave. This speck of wondrous bright light followed the shape of the mountain of the Blood Soul Temple, winding and lingering. It rose bit by bit along with the flowing lava, all the way to the fourth level. When it reached the group of buildings that resembled temples and halls, it broke away from the flow of flames and entered this place. They were truly on completely different levels. Luo Nan more or less grasped some of the changes in the levels of the Blood Soul Temple. The first level of the Blood Soul Temple was the stone forest and the lava lake. It was a place to digest foreign strange energy. The second level was the stone garden. The shepherd's imprint was stored there. It could barely be considered a place for guests. This was because the few members of the Blood Flame Order had yet to complete the construction of the Blood Soul Temple. It was not easy to control them. Who would have thought that Luo Nan possessed the power of hell in this world? He borrowed the control of the human-faced arachnid to forcefully take down the Blood Soul Temple. As for the third level of the cave, looking at the stone statues of the mush-mouth ape and the Mo Luan stone, it should be used to store the imprint of the architect. The fourth level of the temple hall was confirmed to be used to place the imprint of extraordinaries. Jean Tong was the first resident of this place. Then the fifth level was given to the legendary Blood Flame Will. Next was the sixth step, which was the internalization of the Blood Flame Will. What was to be done? Luo Nan was unable to analyze the deeper level of theory for a time. He discovered that the temple hall of the fourth level had a complex structure with courtyards arranged in rows. In fact, the inside was completely empty. Jean Tong's bright imprint entered this place and arrived at a hall to the left. There was a vague structure of rooms and the like outside the hall. But that was all. Luo Nan thought back to the cave on the third level. There were several faceless stone statues. He just needed to wait for the imprint to connect and fill the place with bloody light. Then there would be a supernatural phenomenon. However, there were no statues within the hall of the fourth level. Everything within the rooms was empty. The bright imprint was located in the center of the hall. It was lonely and pitiful. However, even if one could only enter the first two floors but not leave, the majority of the blood-red light was intercepted by the third floor. Luo Nan watched the two stone puppets absorb the bloody light in an unending stream, while the fourth floor was only able to get some leftovers. This level of authority was messed up. He had originally wanted to interfere and see what kind of abnormality Jean Tong's bright light mark would produce. But after careful observation and evaluation, if the mark of light was to be completely enriched, the current amount of blood light energy would not be enough, even if it was multiplied by 10. Based on the situation of the cave puppets, it had at least 70 to 80% of Jean Tong's combat power at its peak, so the energy reserves needed were naturally massive. Unless he killed another transcendent. Go to hell. Luo Nan suppressed this dangerous thought to the bottom of his heart for the time being. He couldn't help but think, what would happen if I went hunting? The wilderness, the ocean, or the cloud world? Luo Nan felt a bit delighted. It was hard not to have such thoughts after beheading an extraordinary of the 100 Greats level. But very quickly, a phone call suppressed his emotional water level by a lot. The call was from Moya. She asked immediately, "Are you okay? Why wasn't he at the charity hall? Where are you, the police station?" "Ah. Oh. I'm fine. I'm fine. Only now did Luo Nan recall that the St. Mary's Church Hospital was one of the many murder sites reported by the Xiao City Police. It was only a wall away from the charity hall they were at last night. No wonder Amoya exploded in anger. Based on this deduction, wasn't his attitude a little too calm today? Luo Nan felt that it was a bit inappropriate, but he couldn't change it for the time being. He could only answer honestly, "We're currently at the South City Administration Hall doing the procedures. Today is Sunday. Something happened at the charity hall. It's not good to stay any longer, so I asked someone to." Luo Nan pondered as he lied. Was this reason really useful? "I'm coming." "Hey, it's all over." "Hey." The other side had already hung up. Luo Nan couldn't help but sigh. Rui Wen's procedures were more or less done at this time. Could it be that he was still waiting here for Amoya to come over? Rui Wen, dressed in a simple t-shirt and cowboy attire, walked out from a compartment in the administration hall right as he was thinking. She was expressionless out of habit. Gauda followed closely by her side. As for the middle-aged man who was 2 steps behind her, he was a deputy chief of the Xiao City SCA branch office. His surname was Hu. He had been requested by He Yuan to be appointed by the Xiao City SCA branch office. He had rushed over specifically to help with the relevant business. As a high-ranking member of the SCA, this deputy chief who possessed a clearer understanding of the inner world. In front of Worker Zhai, the abandoned driveway that ran through the River Wu district, Forest Wall district, and Trigate district was already covered in thin ice. The bandits on the road had also quietened down. Luo Nan frowned as he observed Worker Zhai for a moment. His initial judgment was that Worker Zhai was in a state that seemed to be calm yet wasn't. It was a bit like an epiphany. The breadth and depth of Worker Zhai's processing of information should have increased. Dean Wan and I both feel that old Zhai has entered some sort of state of enlightenment. However, it's hard to say what he's comprehending. This is a matter of the spiritual domain. You're an expert and you've been close to Zhai Yunqing recently. Do you have any guesses? When did I become an expert? Luo Nan shook his head. Actually, he already had a general understanding of what was going on. Moreover, he could solve the problem right now. However, doing this would be too shocking, and it might expose his trump card. I'd better go there. Chapter 5:17. Amoya, you must have been racing. Luo Nan looked at the time. Even if the South City District Administrative Hall wasn't that far away from the Santa Maria Charity Hall, it was a bit too exaggerated for him to have arrived so soon after hanging up the phone. I'll be there in a bit. Luo Nan gave Papercut a reply first, then he hung up temporarily. He waved his hand at Amoya. As soon as he raised his hand, he regretted it. Speaking of which, from last night until now, he had stirred up a storm in the city and killed so many people that his eyes were bloodshot. He had not considered anything else. Speaking of which, Amoya wasn't someone who could be easily dealt with just a random excuse. He seemed to have exposed too many flaws during this period of time. But at this stage, there was no point in confessing anything other than making his family worried. But on the other hand, if the situation did not improve, it would not be a good thing for the family to not be vigilant. At the end of the day, this was a dilemma. It was his impulsive decision to accept Rui Wen's burden, but he was unable to resolve the repercussions. This was the inevitable result. Fortunately, the fruit wasn't ripe yet. There was still room for development. He didn't have much time to think. Amoya arrived in a few steps. It must be said that Amoya was originally a super clothes rack. After entering the commercial company, her current attire was even more like that of a celebrity. She wore a punk-style motorcycle leather jacket on her body and wore sunglasses. She looked extremely cool and dashing. However, Luo Nan knew very well that the hard-soled boots she was wearing were very painful to kick. This was clearly just an outfit for the convenience of fighting. However, Moya actually let out a sigh of relief after seeing Luo Nan and Rui Wen both standing in the hall, safe and sound. Perhaps she had been too worried and on edge, so she lost her energy here. Or perhaps she had to pay attention to maintaining a bit of her image in front of Rui Wen. She just took off her sunglasses and used them to nod at Luo Nan. You need to greet me in the future. Otherwise, how would I know if you're the one in the corpse bag that's being carried out? Luo Nan chuckled and gave an irrelevant answer. You came really fast. Of course. The rioters blew up a building just 2 or 3 blocks away from the Hall of Mercy. There's not even a ghost on the streets now. Don't you know? I know, but I had already left by then. It's only 4 blocks away from that building. What else could Luo Nan say? He could only smile. Fortunately, at this time, Rui Wen attracted his attention. Moya took great pity on this silent, thin, and weak child. She laughed as she bypassed Luo Nan to touch Rui Wen's cheek. You didn't get scared, did you? It'll be much easier to stay at home in the future. Wow, the little guy's skin is so good. However, Moya's gaze cut back and forth between the two's faces a few times. Her meaning was very clear. Are you *King kidding me? It must be said that Deputy Chief, who was a veteran actor, this bit of improvisation shouldn't have been a problem for him. However, his condition today really wasn't that great. His performance was a bit stiff. As for Luo Nan, there was no need to even mention him. Deputy Chief, who also knew that saying too much would only lead to more mistakes. He puffed out his belly and laughed. The matter has been settled. We've gotten to know each other again. Originally, I should be treating you guys to a meal as an elder. Oh, the timing isn't right. I still have some things to do over there. I'll find some time later. Having said this, he braced himself and revealed a smile towards the legendary 2000s of a girl. This little fellow is quite clever. Your family has gained another piece of good fortune. Hold on. If I say these words, won't someone think that I'm mocking him? Deputy Chief, who felt that he already didn't know how to speak. Luckily, Moya had a certain standard when it came to the ways of the world. She immediately smiled and bowed. This is all thanks to your help, Uncle Hu. My family will definitely hold a feast to thank you later. Please do come. Okay. He. Deputy Chief, who made up his mind. He was going to leave Xia City right now. He was going to book a plane ticket immediately. It didn't matter where he was going. Even in a state of emergency, a leader should theoretically be on duty 24 hours a day. But wouldn't it be fine if he gave up his year-end bonus this year? Moya watched Deputy Chief, who walked out of the administrative hall in a hurry. She gazed at Luo Nan, then her gaze swept over Qin Ikuan and Gauda. She suddenly smiled. Excellent. As the saying goes, a scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at in a new light. My boy, your current social circle is quite spectacular. Go back and tell Mom. She'll definitely be very happy. The corner of Luo Nan's eye twitched. I'm in high school after all. Moya lowered her voice a bit. Really? You've put down your previous work. You don't have any problems with your funds, right? Luo Nan was stupefied when faced with the biggest benefactor of his life. But he could only shake his head right now. He understood in his heart that it wouldn't be that easy to get through this time. Who knew that Moya would raise an eyebrow and change the topic? The procedures are done. Are you going home? I'm going to take Rui Wen to the orphanage to perfect the procedures. Do you want to come with me? Luo Nan took the initiative to invite her, but Moya unexpectedly refused. She put on her sunglasses and shook her head. I have a schedule tonight. I should go meet up. You guys just pay attention to your safety. No problem. The group of people walked out of the administrative hall like this. Moya had just bought a red sports car a few days ago. She smiled as she gave Ruewon a light hug. Then she nodded goodbye to Chinikuin and Gouda before getting into the car. The car window slid down. Only now did she hook her hand at Luonan. Luonan walked forward and bent down to look at her. Moya's eyes stared over from behind her sunglasses. I've always believed that people without ideals are trash worse than dogs. But don't make me regret supporting you. Luonan was silent for a second before spitting out a word, I won't. Her voice was faint, but it was clear and distinct within the classic rumbling noise of the sports car's engine. Instead of letting the family's imagination run wild, it was better to guide them in a controllable direction. In any case, uncle and aunt's acceptance of this matter should be better than ordinary people who had no concept. He asked for Chinikuin's opinion. Brother Chin, what do you think about the topic research on targeting drugs based on formatting theory? Do you think it will work if you use it to attract investments? Chinikuin shook his head. I'm a layman. Luonan grew excited. I think it's quite reliable. Actually, there are projects. Brother Octopus's progress is quite good already. I can ask Sister Yuan to help draft up a plan later. As Luonan's accumulated power was released layer by layer and soared all the way, he already possessed a prominent position in the inner world. He also possessed the corresponding right to speak. All right. Perhaps it was his companions at the Xia City branch who were flattering him. But Luonan felt that the matter of pushing out a genuine formatting theory and giving his grandfather a proper name could be put on the agenda in the near future. Formatting theory itself had all sorts of problems. Yuan had warned that formatting theory deviated greatly from the mainstream research direction of the world. But Luonan, a living example, would attract a portion of people to join in the research of formatting theory and form new results. It must be known that Luonan would certainly be one of the most eye-catching focal points of the inner world for some time in the future, unless he was cleanly eliminated by someone. Brother Octopus was a successful example. Luonan hoped that hundreds and thousands of such examples would appear. In that case, his grandfather, Luonan's suddenly excited mood stopped for a moment. He couldn't help but think of the hospital's diagnosis of his grandfather's condition. He subconsciously used his soul cloak to roughly observe his grandfather's current situation. An old man, who was already emaciated and deformed, was wrapped in a thick blanket in the hospital room. He sat on the bed and stared blankly at the pattering freezing rain outside. Luonan didn't know what this rain, this city, and this world looked like in his grandfather's eyes. The severe symptoms of schizophrenia caused everything before this old man's eyes to transform into the harshest and most realistic of illusions. In this unchangeable and distorted world, even the most rigorous rationality had to yield to the patient's instinctive feelings, creating absurd logic. Even for the patient, it was still rigorous and thorough. It was impeccable. Reality was just this sorrowful. Luonan's soul cloak gave him an astonishing range of perception, but it also made it impossible for him to avoid this reality. He didn't even have the chance to buffer. But perhaps it was because of the continuous advancement of his cultivation and the influence of his glorious battle achievements, Luonan had a marvelous confidence and premonition right now. Perhaps it was a misconception. In reality, this wasn't something that suddenly appeared. It had formed a long time ago, just if his grandfather always adhered to the logic of formatting theory, then perhaps the only person who could communicate with him would be Luonan himself. Even if he couldn't do it right now, sooner or later he would discover a docking window as his understanding and application of formatting theory deepened. Luonan had once thought of using a psychic's drawing to try it out, but now that he thought about it, it was quite unrealistic. Due to the aggravation of his schizophrenia, the heavens knew what the drawing looked like in his grandfather's eyes. Only by truly connecting their minds could that tiny bit of possibility be unearthed. Luo Nan turned his head to face Rui when his thoughts reached this point. It'll be a bit quieter in 2 days. I'll take you to see my grandfather. There's a new person in the family. I should at least let him know. Rui Wen listened quietly. She didn't say much. Luo Nan knew that she didn't refuse, and that was enough. Luo Nan let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. He slightly closed his eyelids, but when he wanted to open them again, he felt that they were strangely heavy. A deep black tide surged over in an instant, nearly engulfing him. He did his best to open his eyes twice, but he actually couldn't open them. He nearly wanted to fall asleep. But he was suddenly startled in his daze. He suddenly exerted strength and broke out in a layer of cold sweat. Only then did his drowsiness disappear a bit. Mr. Luo. Chi Nikuan noticed Luo Nan's mental state. He was a bit worried. You should sleep in the car for a bit. You haven't slept for nearly 40 hours. It's nothing. I was just thinking about something. Luo Nan told a completely unconvincing lie and said, open the car windows. Let some air in. This didn't quite meet the security requirements, but God, who sat in the driver's seat, still did as he was told. As the car windows were lowered, the air currents brought about by the high-speed travel, along with the freezing rain and cold air, surged in. This caused Luo Nan's mind to shake, and quite a bit of his drowsiness disappeared. However, he understood very well that this was a temporary phenomenon. Not sleeping for 40 hours wasn't a reason for him to be sleepy. With his current level of cultivation and attainments, not sleeping for 4 days was no big deal. However, the current situation was different in the end. The root of everything was still the soul cloak that he had unfurled with all his strength. From Luo Nan's perspective, as long as the large production line of his closed system operated endlessly, the area covered by the soul cloak could endlessly expand outwards. The area covered by the soul cloak had already been pushed out nearly 600 kilometers, not counting the area on land. Moreover, it showed no signs of stopping. It was because of this that Luo Nan was able to accurately lock onto Jin Tong's position within the boundless ocean. He set up an ambush and killed this heavily injured extraordinary in the shortest amount of time possible. But the matter of expanding the range was the natural result of his closed system and his special interference method. It was just like stuffing things into a hard drive. The framework was there. It was a matter of course. Anyone could do it. However, to sort out a logic that ran through everything from beginning to end within a hard drive that was crammed full of information, and to perform efficient calculations in a timely manner, the difficulty had risen by more than a single level. In the cloud world, the range of Luo Nan's soul cloak's expansion was much vaster than in the cloud world. It was just that the environment there was relatively monotonous and the targets were limited. There was no need for any calculations at all. But in Xia City, he needed to sort out and quickly process all sorts of information within this vast region. This included, but was not limited to, 20 transportation layers, 24 administrative districts, several dozen professional employment organizations, over 100 dangerous targets from the inner world, and countless dangerous nodes and locations. After all, no one knew when or how a fatal crisis would befall him or any of his loved ones. Luo Nan undoubtedly felt guilty for creating such a situation. This was no longer just a problem of energy and ability. It also included straightforward pressure and suppression. Luo Nan thought about the matters of his loved ones in his mind. A considerable portion of them were precisely the deformed embodiment of this pressure. Right now, the pressure was as great as a mountain, and the exhaustion of his mental strength was severe. But he needed to maintain a calm demeanor in front of others, especially Rui Wen. Otherwise, how could he display the responsibility he should have? However, these days could not continue for too long. Luo Nan intentionally diverted his attention in order to avoid being assaulted by his fatigue once more. His eyeballs swiveled, and his gaze stopped at the front control screen. A video program was playing there. God had turned it on after getting in the car. God and Chinikuan were both professionals. Their professional standards were extremely high. Normally, when they were driving and executing missions, they would not be distracted by other matters. But right now, they were paying attention to this program because it was relatively sensitive and closely related to the mission. Right now, the program was displaying a certain region in the outer seas of Xia City. The Hill of Bones was floating on the surface of the sea. Luo Nan had nothing to say. Is Shanji still broadcasting live? Chinikuan answered, right now she's only providing the live footage. The main point is still the analysis of the experts. God increased the volume of the program as he spoke, and he transmitted the image to the audio and video system in the back seats. Without the stimulating, immersive scene, the appeal of Zhangji's live broadcast would drop by over half. Right now, they were faced with this extremely topical topic, but there was no straightforward answer to the Hill of Bones. It was the turn of the experts from all walks of life to step onto the stage and display their talent for nonsense. It was reasonable to say that the most important question was who created the Hill of Bones. However, a large portion of the energy of the experts from all walks of life wasn't focused on this. Instead, they were focused on the accumulating gold beneath the Hill of Bones. This dual-purpose ship possessed a very strong symbolic significance. Especially when the search work continued. More and more corpses and remains of the members of the 5 metal hunting group were found in the surrounding seas. The topic of discussion inevitably pointed towards a most crucial point. The 5 metal hunting group was nearly completely annihilated. This was something that could already be confirmed. But had the true soul of the group, Jin Tong, already melted into this hill of bones? Not even his bones remained. Or did he rely on the inconceivable abilities of extraordinaries to avoid death? Whether he lived or died, whether he survived or perished. This determined the nature of this matter. Aside from this, even if the number of people who died was multiplied by 10, it still wouldn't have any decisive significance. And for the Xia City branch, the focus of their attention was different. Chinikuan spoke in a low voice, looking at the intelligence from the various airlines and various internal transportation points. I'm afraid that there will be a large number of people entering the country in the next few days. The intimidation generated by this live broadcast is lower than we expected. If Her Majesty Empress Wu could. Sigh. Chinikuan felt that it was useless to say anything more when he spoke to this point. He shook his head and shut his mouth. However, Luo Nan already understood what Chinikuan meant. He shook his head as well, but the meaning behind Chinikuan's words was quite different. 16 billion. 2 out of 1,000. The vast majority of people will be tempted. But the ones who are tempted and have the power to act will always be a small portion. Chinikuan found Luo Nan's words strange. The problem is that since these people have the power to act, they won't easily let go. If we can't stop this momentum, then it can only prove that we haven't killed enough of these fellows with the power to act. Chinikuan was speechless. Luo Nan's eyelids trembled slightly. He was still restrained by his drowsiness. His voice was a bit indistinct. A few days ago, I participated in Charlie and Tian Lai's funerals. I thought through a problem. Since we are all part of a large network of social relationships, a certain lack will cause discomfort. People will habitually make an issue out of this network. Those people treat me like this. And if I want to counterattack, killing a few people will affect many more people. I will be exhausted from running for my life in the future. Brother Qin, don't you think this makes sense? Chinikuan was unable to respond. God looked over through the rearview mirror. This young genius in the eye of the storm. Has he finally revealed his worry? Luo Nan's drooping eyelids covered his pupils. It was impossible to see what he was thinking in the end. On the program, the rather die-hard faction and the rather lively faction were still arguing. If they could fight, the two sides would certainly beat the brains out of each other. Luo Nan could only think in this clamorous and lively atmosphere. Fortunately, there is a phenomenon in this world. It's called, birds of a feather flock together. The freezing rain fell without end. The infrastructure of the high-altitude stratum was good, but it was indifferent to this. However, the feeling of watching the rolling muddy water form a line in the recycling stratum as it fell from the sky wasn't that wonderful. According to statistics, 14 of the 24 administrative districts of Xia City possessed the recycling stratum. The Western City District and the 4 satellite cities had the most recycling stratum. This was because these places were the gates to the wilderness. They were also the sewage outlets that poured out the city's garbage, in various senses. At the same time, they were also the flow points of Grey Capital. Setting up a welfare home here was actually a very subtle matter. It was very easy for people to misunderstand. Those who knew the ropes would ask what the code of the dark web was. Those who were impatient would directly inquire about the price. But then again, even in the well-ordered South City District where the recycling stratum didn't exist, who knew how many crimes were hidden within the Santa Maria Charity Hall? From this aspect, Principal Juan Pagoda overseeing the Lawn Town Welfare Home had at least established a Pure Land. Luo Nan got off the car by the roadside outside the welfare home. Dean Juan, Papercut, and the kid Di Weiwu were waiting at the entrance. Beside them was worker Zhai, who was sitting upright and watching the rain. Worker Zhai's situation hadn't changed at all compared to what he had observed through the soul cloak. He was watching the rain, but he wasn't foolishly trying to see the rain as a flower. He had entered a state of selflessness, testing out his own ideas over and over again. That's right. Worker Zhai was endlessly sketching the condensation ring. He should have faintly discovered the subtle changes in the environment caused by the freezing rain. He hoped to borrow the interference scene constructed by the soul cloak to seize the opportunity to complete the condensation ring project. After all, the water molecules were sufficiently interfered with. They were exceptionally lively. It was different from being by the side of a pool or the surface of the sea. This pulsating rhythm was an extremely beneficial guide. Actually, the success rate of worker Zhai's telepathic drawing was already extremely high. Occasionally, droplets of water would fly through the curtain of rain, showing the results of his hard work. However, these works were lacking by a thread compared to the semi-permanent structure Luo Nan spoke of, a stable carrier that carried the wonders of the interference between the mental and the material. This thread of difference was the most torturous. Since Luo Nan was the one who proposed the cultivation plan, he naturally had his own thoughts when faced with this situation. However, Papercut and Principal Juan Pagoda were both present, so he didn't act rashly. Instead, he asked for their opinions. The model you spoke of is reliable in theory, but it's lacking by a bit. Papercut also saw the doorway. He was a mental side awakened, so his general knowledge structure was much more solid than Luo Nan's. Today's environment is good, and my state is good. If I can't even do this, it will be too hurtful. Juan Pagoda said, although the material nature doesn't conflict, it isn't the best point of focus. What? Papercut didn't understand. Luo Nan understood. Dean Juan means that the condensation ring itself isn't too compatible with the nature of worker Zhai's ability. You're talking about mutual promotion and restraint. Papercut and Gao Tianshi had a good relationship. They had been together for a long time, so Papercut was a bit affected. This description had a very traditional flavor to it. Juan Pagoda actually expressed his approval. It doesn't matter if it's metal, wood, water, fire, earth, or electromagnetism, heat, and other forms of expression. They are all just entry-level steps that lead to the ultimate material nature. However, everyone's temperament is different, and their sensitivity is different. Their directions should be different as well. Old Jai's ability is electron affinity. Could it be that he needs the condensation ring? Papercut cracked a joke that wasn't really a joke. Her Majesty Empress will probably doesn't have any in stock. Chapter 519. This was all Luo Nan could do in regards to Worker Jai's leap from 0 to 1 of the Dragon's Gate. Perhaps turning Worker Jai into a member of his closed production line would greatly speed up the process, but what was the point of this pointless efficiency? Luo Nan patted Worker Jai on the shoulder and stood up. After a slight hesitation, she stuffed the notebook in her hands into his hands. Perhaps the randomness of pure craftsmanship would help Worker Jai struggle out of his excessive pursuit of precision. Worker Jai raised his head and smiled at Luo Nan. He was not polite. He picked up the digital pen and began to draw up and down in the working area of the drawing software. Disregarding everything else, his body language was much more relaxed. Luo Nan shifted his gaze. Brother Papercut, don't just sit around. You've also trained in the condensation ring. Come over and talk to Worker Jai. Papercut had been looking at the translucent water droplets penetrating the curtain of rain in a daze. After he came to his senses, he spat. Only a ghost has ever practiced it. Cough. Even if he did, it would be for fun. Though he said this, he still came over obediently. He sat in Luo Nan's previous seat and watched Worker Jai draw. At this moment, Di Weiwu had also recovered from the excitement of witnessing mental magic with his own eyes. His eyes were shining, and he had an expression that said, I don't understand it at all, but it's so interesting. Someone, hurry up and teach me. However, he had just expressed his disdain for this sort of cultivation method. In the end, he didn't have the face to spit it out in a short amount of time. He simply made his way between his godfather and Papercut, staring closely at Luo Nan's loose-leaf notebook. He wanted to find a possible mechanism within it. Since the three of them were together, Luo Nan no longer disturbed them. He smiled at Dean Wanta and said, let's go through the formalities. Luo Nan was talking about the continuation of Rui Wen's relationship transfer. Actually, it was more or less done in the administrative hall. Luo Nan was just saying this to give Worker Jai some space and to chat with Dean Wanta. Forget about the procedures. I think what you should do now is to have a good sleep. Dean Wanta's words were almost the same as Qin Ikuan's advice in the car. Obviously, Luo Nan's exhausted appearance had reached the point where everyone could see it. At this moment, Qin Ikuan nodded at the side, expressing that Dean Wan's words had deeply resonated with him. Luo Nan grinned, but he didn't say much. He led Rui Wen inside. Wanta stopped persuading him and directly called the nanny of the orphanage to complete the last part of the procedures. It took a total of 5 minutes. At this time, Worker Jai and the others had not made any breakthroughs. Luo Nan could not come and go in a hurry, so he stayed in the reception room and chatted with Wanta. Rui Wen sat quietly by Luo Nan's side. Qin Ikuan wandered around the room, appreciating the first-rate design effects. Luo Nan could not help but let out a yawn in the time it took to say a few words. A black tide surged before his eyes, and his mind grew more and more absent-minded. Just now, when he had helped Worker Jai change his train of thought, he had boosted his spirit and gotten a little excited. Now that the excitement had passed, he felt even more tired. The Dean of Myriad Pagoda was making tea for Luo Nan and the others. She said leisurely when she saw this, forcibly going against the nature of matter is never pleasant. With such a heavy burden on you right now, once you suffer a backlash, the consequences will be even more serious. Luo Nan's eyelids twitched when he heard this, but he didn't completely open them in the end. It was also Wanta's fault. The reception room he designed had maximized the livability and comfort factor. Sitting on the old sofa, one's body would feel soft and unconsciously relaxed. But now was absolutely not the time for him to relax. He couldn't sleep no matter what. Right now, the entire world was watching Xia City. Countless ability users were rushing over. Since it was unknown whether Jin Tong was alive or dead, these people held quite a bit of wishful thinking. The more wishful thinking they were, the more dangerous it was. Luo Nan knew that he was walking on a tightrope, but he believed that his limit was far from being reached. Wait a bit more. Wait a bit more. Wait until a sufficient number of people came in, and they entered this large net woven by the freezing rain. The hexier vibrated slightly, and Luo Nan's telepathy swept over. He was dazed for a moment before he confirmed the relevant information. It was the OK hand signal sent by the octopus. Luo Nan responded, "Thanks. I'll go get it from you in a bit. Don't forget that this is Shangding." This short sentence displayed the grief and indignation of the researchers who had been forcibly transferred. Luo Nan laughed for a moment. Only then did he hear Wanta's voice enter his ears. The sensitivity of nerve cells to information will decrease under a state of suppression. If something goes wrong right now, it will be very hard for you to react. This isn't decided by the range of your senses. Luo Nan quivered. His eyelids completely opened as he looked at Wanta. This sentence was much more straightforward than the previous one. This leader of the Order of Creators clearly had a certain understanding of the current state of affairs. Moreover, he was aware of a deeper level of information. Luo Nan looked at Wanta. Chi Nikuan, who had turned to the corner of the reception room, cast a stunned gaze toward Luo Nan. The bodyguard also heard some clues from Wanta's words, but he still didn't dare to make a rash judgment. Wanta noticed the change in Chi Nikuan's expression. His brows slightly furrowed. But soon, he straightened out his attitude. After all, Xie Junping had said that if he wanted to reach the level of overall planning, he would need to go through 5 or 6 stages and spend 3 to 5 years of time. Even if the method was impressive, the threshold of time was there. It was useless if he couldn't cross it. Luo Nan laughed. My math grades are only average. He still held the attitude of chatting and chatting, but Wanta appeared very serious. Though overall planning is essentially an algorithm, we don't need to use mathematical logic to explain it. If there is a certain language or code, then it should be a signal from the brain itself. Really? Luo Nan blinked his eyes. Wanta really did turn serious. He gazed at Luo Nan. For the vast majority of people, learning this kind of code is like having an unreal dream. Because our consciousness has no way of sensing brain activity, we can only use logic, including experiments on our own bodies, to verify it one by one. But you are different. At least I believe you are. Are you referring to introspection? Is this a prerequisite? Luo Nan guessed. Wanta shook his head. You need to have the precision to touch the nervous system. This requirement is a bit high, but Luo Nan was completely capable of this. As a psychic ability user who was proficient in internal refinement, introspection wasn't difficult for him. And his many years of experience in drug modification had given him an extremely high sensitivity towards his own nervous system. He also possessed the corresponding understanding. And at this time, Luo Nan finally discovered that Wanta was undoubtedly communicating with him. It could be said that he was teaching a few things. The tea on the short table to the side was already cold, but no one remembered to change it. Let alone Luo Nan, even Chi Nikuan couldn't help but prick up his ears. He wanted to see what this so-called overall planning theory looked like. Only Rui Wen sat quietly on the sofa. She seemed to be listening, but she also seemed to be daydreaming. Her aura was faint, making people unconsciously ignore her existence. Wanta spoke softly, "Right now, there is no harm in verifying it. You are also a professional researcher of the nervous system. The algorithm I proposed is based on a few basic facts. Please pay attention to whether or not it goes against your common sense. First, the brain possesses an extremely complex parallel structure. But most of the time, when a person perceives a meaningful and complete piece of information, it is established on top of a sequence of time. It will certainly display a sequential order. The meaning of these words was that the brain could only handle one meaningful task at a time. It could also be said that the same task often required the brain to utilize multiple functional areas in cooperation to complete it. This was something that had been proven by relevant research for many years. It was also a point that people criticized the human brain as an inferior biological computer. Luo Nan was able to see this from his biology textbook, so he immediately expressed his approval without hesitation. But then he thought of something else in the blink of an eye. Since this was the case, what was the meaning of multitasking? There was clearly a contradiction. Wanta didn't verify it a step further. He continued, "Second, depolarization will occur when a nerve cell is activated. During this time, the nerve cell will no longer receive new information. In other words, there is a gap between activation and inhibition." Yes, this is common sense. Dean Wanta sped up his speech. Third, the brain's reaction time is different for each level of input information. But in the end, there will certainly be an algorithm that encompasses everything, translating it into human language and habits of thought. Fourth, the integration and calculation process of external information mostly occurs in the deep waters that humans are unable to perceive. This is the direction and result of the evolution of the human brain. Luo Nan only thought for a moment before admitting that there was nothing wrong with this. This was all basic knowledge in the relevant field. Even if there were some disputes, it was still feasible to talk about it. Wanta smiled. "You see, there is a division of labor, a gap, a difference, a direction, and a result. In this way, as long as one has the means of transformation, one can target one's own perception and thought, and follow a certain rhythm and a certain order to carry out dispatching, making it more efficient. This is all possible." Luo Nan slowly nodded his head, agreeing with this logic. Wanta summarized, "On this basis, the meaning of overall coordination is to adjust the reception and reaction rate of each level of information during the time that humans can form effective responses. This is to reduce mutual interference as much as possible, yet it is necessary to integrate efficiently. Finally, it is unified at the highest level of thought." Luo Nan pondered seriously for a moment. He scratched his head and said, "I roughly understand. Dean, what you mean is to grasp the rhythm of activation and inhibition of the nerve cell, to increase the level of information, to receive more information in the same amount of time. Oh, if the frequency of integration is increased, some perceptible thought processes may evolve into instincts. But this is a complete transformation of the brain's mental functions. Even if the large structure remains the same, how can the synaptic connections be added or deleted be in the billions? Even if the nervous system is extremely malleable, how can we grasp this direction and scale?" You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.